This episode of BJJ Meditations is sponsored by Outlier Database. Outlier Database is the ultimate analytical tool for no-gi jiu-jitsu. It's a tag searchable database that allows you to see how principles, concepts, and techniques are applied at the highest levels of grappling. I use Outlier Database as a supporting tool for any jiu-jitsu instructional, using the instructional for technical study and Outlier Database for understanding practical application. Sign up for Outlier Database today at outlierdb.com and use the promo code BJJMed to take 50% off your first month's membership. That's outlieردb.com and promo code BJJMED. Link is also in our show notes. And thank you to Jake Luigi and Outlier Database for supporting the podcast. Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 91. I'm your host, Joe Hannan, Joe from Jersey. We're going to be calling this episode Tying the Room Together. Where have I been? I've been really busy, guys. I'm sorry. I apologize. I hear from you. I hear you missed the podcast. I missed the podcast too. I've just had other priorities, primarily Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When I took over as the head coach for Shane, I immediately just had to start creating some new systems, focusing on instructor development, and just thinking about how we present information for the best learning experience in general. And that's sort of what I'm going to be talking about today, is what I've been up to since our last episode. Largely what I've been up to is this idea of tying the room together. Hence the title of this episode, Tying the Room Together. So what do I mean by tying the room together? When I look at what my school means to me and what its beauty has always been over the years, I've been training there almost for 10 years now. It's this idea of it being a diverse and supportive learning environment. And I mean that both in terms of what we teach and how we teach, and also the student population. We have people from all walks of life, academics, people from pharmaceutical companies, blue collar folks, people who are just career journeymen in jiu-jitsu, it seems. And we all make it work, you know? And I think that's part of our secret sauce, is this cocktail of diversity plus mixed interests plus a passion for the sport. And not just a passion for the sport in its own sake, but a passion for the sport as a way of self-expression. And all of that combines into this beautiful mixture that I find so compelling, and also that I think is unique, because there's never really been a PBJJ style. Like, if you think about our lineage, we're a Marcelo Garcia Association school. There are very few people in our school who play Marcelo Garcia's game. Even if you look at sort of his academy in New York, when you had folks like Marcos Tinoco, Mateus Lutes, Mateus Denise training there on the reg, each of them kind of had their own style, and there certainly were elements of Marcelo in each of them, since they kind of came up under them, but they all sort of put their own spin on it, and they all had elements of their game that were truly unique to them. And I think in some ways that pedigree of diversity got handed down to Princeton BJJ, or at the very least, it was something that registered with Emily very deeply, and something that she had always strived to nurture in our school. And it starts at the front of the room. When I think about all of our instructors, I really can't think of anyone in the room who does anything similarly. And while some might look at this as a weakness, I actually think it's a strength, because I think it all boils down to what the objective is of the school. And like I mentioned, I'll get back to this objective idea later in the conversation, but I think this starts at the top, and it started with Emily when she founded the school as a place where people can discover their jiu-jitsu and then refine it. And I think this discovery process is ultimately what makes our school so compelling. Is, in my mind, you're not a black belt unless you've engaged in this process of discovery. Otherwise, you may be learning by rote. You may just be copying someone else's game, or you may be copying whatever thing seems to be the most attractive or the most compelling of the moment. Is that thing true to you? It would be like me sitting down and trying to write like James Joyce or something. You know, there can only be one James Joyce. He's amazing, and emulating him is just going to be a poor copy of a masterpiece. So why would I do that? I need to write like myself. And I think jiu-jitsu is the same. Certainly, you know, there are trade-offs to this approach. Like, for example, we are not super focused on what's happening right now at the highest levels of the sport, meaning like the latest developments, the latest techniques, the latest guard, etc. We're certainly like paying attention to that as an instructor staff just because we love the game and we love to see where it's evolving. But we're not necessarily like chasing those shiny objects, especially speaking for myself. I'm not chasing them unless they're sort of true to my self-expression in the art. That doesn't mean I don't admire them, and that doesn't mean I don't strive to understand them, because you're going to run into this stuff out in the wild, especially if you're a competitor. But in terms of integrating those things and making them part of my game, that's a self-directed process. And I think in an age of excess information, in an age where everything you could ever want to learn about jiu-jitsu is kind of out there on the internet, what is the value proposition for going to a school? I think part of it is community. Most people are coming to a jiu-jitsu school to feel like they belong somewhere. And the other part of it is the skill of discernment, to be able to think critically, to do exactly what I'm describing right now and say, okay, I understand this. I see how it works. I see it's really beautiful, but it's like asking me, a guitar player, to like learn how to play the trumpet. The trumpet's never going to be true to my self-expression, so it's not for me. But I do think that all of our instructors have developed games or in the process of developing games that are true to their self-expression. The guy who comes to mind first and foremost in this regard is one of our black belts, Ryan Healy. Ryan has one of the strangest open guards I've ever encountered, and it breaks a lot of rules about open guard, but I don't think I've ever passed his open guard a single time. His fiancée, Maddie, same thing. She's a smaller person. She's very mobile. Because she's a smaller person, she never holds still. Very difficult to pass her guard because she's always in motion. She's always repummeling. And it's just kind of a marvelous thing to behold. Both of these guys, guy and girl, their games can't really be broken down into like a direct match to any grappler, right? They've just sort of been chosen over the years intuitively, in many cases, especially with Ryan, what makes sense to them. And they've doubled down on those things, and they express them in compelling and powerful ways. You can't argue with the fact that their jiu-jitsu is good. They're some of the hardest rules in the room. And this is the process that I think everybody should follow, at least in our school. But it has to be counterbalanced, right? You can't ignore the latest and greatest developments of the sport, because then you're going to be caught unaware. For example, I think one of the strongest things that Shane brought to the school as the head coach was that he was constantly bringing in these things and saying, look, guys, we need to know the bolo, or at the very least, we need to know how to deal with it, because you're going to encounter it out there in competition. Same thing with headquarters passing very early in his tenure as the head coach. Like, all of these things are so critical to have in your head, even if you're not going to play them. So this idea of self-expression, it can't be so extreme to the extent that you're ignoring everything that isn't aligned with your self-expression. I think, if anything, you have to pay attention and you have to understand how it works, so that way you can deal with it in real time. But there is a bit of a distinction there. You have to, as a whole, I think our community has to keep this curiosity, this insatiable curiosity at the heart of our learning. And that's central to our culture of continuous improvement. That's how we're always going to get better. And that starts at the top of the room. It's a commitment as the head coach and as anyone on the coaching staff to carve out time every single week to study footage, to study instructionals, and to take something back and improve your game, or at the very least improve the games of the students in the room. That's work. There's work that has to be done off the mats. Otherwise, if you're just showing up and doing the same thing over and over again, you're not going to grow. So it's much more than just a verbal commitment to continuous improvement. It's actually a practical commitment. It's this distinction between participatory knowing and propositional knowing. Like, you need to be in the process of doing. It's knowledge of versus practical knowledge. So what are we doing as a coaching staff when I zoom out and look at the operations, the coaching operations of our school? I think what we're looking to do is transcend the past, parts of jiu-jitsu that don't work, but at the same time, and we're certainly looking to bring in new elements, but we're also looking to include the best elements of what has passed, right? This is the age-old expression of like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the way you figure out and the way you make the distinction between baby and bathwater is by cultivating the skill of discernment, but that's how we continue to go up. You never really leave something behind. You just transcend and include it. You're spiraling upward, transcending, including. And this is Ken Wilber's theory of spiral dynamics and how it applies to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, at least in our school. We're not going to abandon the shrimp, for example, but we may change how we drill it. We may change how we introduce it to students. We may change when we introduce it to students. This is how the evolution of the sport continues. So as the head coach, if I'm sitting here thinking about, if this transcend and include model of spiral dynamics is to be our future, then our success is kind of predicated on my ability as the head coach to tie the room together. It's only part of my job is to have strong jiu-jitsu and to continue improving my jiu-jitsu. I'd say that the more important thing is to empower the coaching staff, empower the right people to do the right things at the right time, and encourage them to sort of follow their bliss, pursue their curiosity in the best cases. And in the worst cases, if somebody is just being stagnant and not going out and learning more, maybe to give them a loving kick in the ass. Because if we're not pursuing evolution, then we're declining, right? It's not really something we can rest on. But anyway, this idea of empowering the right people to do the right things at the right time, that success requires tying the room together, bringing the coaching staff together. And in some ways, I feel like I'm getting a second chance at this because it's been a long time since I've been in a true leadership role. Probably my last true leadership role where I had like a team of people that I was managing was at NJ Advanced Media when I had a curation team of almost like 40 people for a while. And I think I was too young and too immature to realize that this was really the heart of my work. It wasn't being the best editor in the room. It wasn't creating systems for the other editors to follow. It was sort of mustering the strength of the entire team and bringing it to bear on problems. And I think I failed miserably at this. I think that I was just too immature at the time to do this. I wasn't well equipped to do it. I was a really great technical operator and an okay manager and a horrible leader. And now I'm getting another chance at leading, and I'm really trying hard not to fuck it up. I'm really trying hard not to fuck it up. But my heart tells me that I'm moving in the right direction, and the level of engagement that I'm seeing right now in the coaching staff is beautiful, and it just feels amazing to be a part of this team that's capable of doing so much together. So this ethos of tying the room together and the second shot at leadership has launched this grand experiment in my brain, which has now sort of been handed to my coaching staff. It's a two-part experiment. Part one is I just created a simple spreadsheet of all the coaches on the team, and I asked coaches to nominate each other for skill sets that they find admirable in that coach. It could be something as concrete as you have an amazing butterfly guard, or it could be something as abstract as you do such an amazing job teaching brand new students. How do I do that? And the idea here is that once this nomination process is complete, I'll share the results with the instructors and encourage them like, hey, your peers want to learn how you do this. Why don't you host a 1.5 hour clinic on a weekend sometime where we can all get together and learn how you do what you do? So that's side A. Side B of the experiment is I asked all the instructors to think about what are holes in our collective game. What are things that are out there in the jiu-jitsu world that people in our school are not doing? Some of those things include 50-50, for example. We haven't really had a strong 50-50 presence in our school historically. I'm trying to think of what else is on the list. There's 50-50. Our takedown game could certainly be improved. Our bolo game could certainly be improved. What else? I have to go back and look at the list, but you get my point. Every school has sort of these blind spots, these knowledge gaps in their instructor base. So the idea here is let's create a list of these blind spots and let's all volunteer to take one on. Let's all volunteer to take on something we don't know and then teach it to the rest of the instructing staff. And I get the argument that this isn't a substitute for learning directly from the source and getting that expert level of experience, but I don't ever want people to be paralyzed by the necessity to be perfect. I think we're constantly striving for perfect, and I see this as a good starting point. And on a higher level, I see this as a way of just tying the coaching staff together and consequently the whole student body together. It's a way of saying to your fellow instructor, I see what you do and it's amazing, and I really want to know it, and I really support you in taking on the things you don't know. And I hope it nurtures this culture of continuous improvement. I hope it really ties the room together. But in the wise words of Calypso, the lovable school teacher from Bluey, we'll see. We will see. I'm also open to the possibility of completely being wrong on this, but I have a good feeling about it, and I'm already loving what I'm seeing from our coaches. So that's sort of what I've been up to since December 26th when I published the most recent episode. I'm hoping to get into a cadence of publishing more often, but I don't want to promise anything. But I do miss doing this. This is a beautiful outlet for me, and I hope it's a constructive outlet for you as well. But that's all I've got for you this week, folks. As always, if you're interested in coaching, you can hit me up at bjjmeditations@gmail.com. That can be the performance coaching that I do, or that can be strength and conditioning coaching. I'm already working with a few grapplers on their strength and conditioning specifically for this sport, and I think they're having some good results. So if that's something you want to get in on, just email me. And the other thing I want to leave you with is the PBJJ Book Club. That will be Sunday, February 16th at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom. I'm flirting with doing an in-person event too, and then having a Zoom option for people who want to stream. This month, we will be reading The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, which is a wonderful book for any martial artist, as well as the first chapter of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. And if you're going to read the Tao Te Ching, I highly recommend the Jia Fu Feng and Jane English translation. I think they walk the line beautifully in that translation by respecting the abstract nature of the text without making it super concrete for Western audiences. It's like a pretty good compromise. So I encourage you to check out that translation. But that's all I have for you this week, folks. As always, thank you for your support. Thank you for listening, and we will talk next week. Thanks again to our sponsor, Outlier Database. Use the promo code BJJMed to take 50% off your first month's membership. That's outlierdatabase.com, OUTLIERDB.com, and promo code BJJMED. Link is in our show notes.